Climate, for instance. In that work, of course, Karen wasn't necessarily the person carrying out that basic research, but she enabled it, and she facilitated it to be possible. I was thinking on the way here, how many times I've actually seen Karen read a tablet in the fields? I think it was once in the last 15 years. What? And it doesn't mean you're any less of a historian. That's certainly the case. In fact, it makes her more of a historian in my book. The fact that I've seen her work in Neolithic sites, literally full of mud, as she sifts through paleobotanical data from flotation, or crawling on her knees to recover rock samples from caves, climbing mountains to look at reliefs. Or even collecting literally pond scum, sort of algae in water, just to facilitate some environmental knowledge. Karen has done all these things. So she has created that ecosystem that I like to talk about, that knowledge that can be created that benefits her work, but also work by others. So that's really a great benefit. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that she's created also an environment for us to really thrive. We talked a little bit about the Assur dig house yesterday, the famous sort of dig house built by Walter André, who's really one of the founding fathers of modern archaeology, in my mind, in the ancient Near East. And that dig house has an important symbolic meaning. She helped to restore it. ISIS had actually occupied that house during the height of their occupation in that region and really messed the house up. They vandalized the house. And she spent quite a lot of effort and time really to restore that house, to make it a really beautiful house. If you come there today, you'd be amazed how it looks. It's really a beautiful location to dig, and I encourage you, hopefully one day, that you can come and visit that house. One quick story about that house is that, and this is kind of harking back to my own sort of roots. I'm from Mosul, my family. We're known as Muslawis, and we have a bit of a reputation for being slightly, I guess you would say, stingy people. Yes, thank you for saying that. And so one of the great things that Karen does is she somehow gets people to pay for things. She gets people to basically build things or get her equipment. And in that Assur dig house, she basically had it provisioned with solar panels, solar batteries, paying absolutely nothing for it. She got the Austrian embassy to pay for a lot of it, and I think the Bavarian state as well contributed. And that's just one example of how she makes that working environment possible to be better for everyone, comfortable, and enabling in many ways. And it allows us to really enjoy the benefits of that research that we're going to see tonight. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Professor Karen Radner.
I've been told that the mics here work now. Is that true? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you, Mark. So I think that makes me an honorary Muslawi. We both are very stingy, and we both love other people to pay for our stuff. So that's why we have been working together for decades now. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here. I will continue with Assyria in the 7th century BC. Today's topic is empire building and building imperial infrastructure. And we will start with the same set of slides that I used yesterday, just to contextualize Assyria in the 7th century. From the 9th century onwards, Assyria's size tripled, and when we look at this slide, we see the extent of the provincial system, so the regions under direct control by the time of Shalmaneser III, when Kalchu, Nimrud, was the capital. And on this slide, we are in the 7th century during the reign of Esarhaddon. Nineveh is now the capital, and as you can see, the provincial extent is now vastly larger, reaching from the eastern Mediterranean to the, well, roughly the region of Hamadan in western Iran. So with that came a lot of interesting innovations administratively, militarily, and so on, but we are not concerned with this exciting period of empire consolidation. We are concerned with the 7th century, which I've described yesterday as a century of extremes, and we had focused on some gigantic things that have happened, buildings that were built, and so on. And in this vein, we'll continue today. After the age of conquest comes a period of experimentation. That's what I am focusing today. We will look at two Assyrian kings in particular. One is Sennacherib, and the other one is his grandson Ashurbanipal. Yesterday we also focused quite a bit on Esarhaddon. Today we won't. Today it's about these two kings. And we'll start with building imperial infrastructure, and then we'll move on to the more general topic of building empire. So yesterday I very, very briefly talked about the new capital Nineveh and what a gigantic building project that was. Today we are focusing some more on this. It's with great pleasure that I acknowledge the presence of Julian Witt somewhere in this room. Yeah, here he is. So I use a slide of Julian's that I always use when I compare and contrast Nineveh to the previous capital cities. You'll remember that I pointed out the madness of creating a city with 15 city gates, the sort of unfortunate repercussions of having a capital along a river. When we talked about this yesterday, I quoted John McGuinness on this, and I remind you of this fact today as well. You can see that Nineveh shares a lot of characteristics otherwise with the previous state capitals, but for its sheer size, it stands out. And yesterday, I've also emphasized that during that time, continuing all the way through the 7th century, many people from all over the Assyrian lands, and especially the regions of the client states, including especially Egypt in the 670s, were brought to Assyria's central region, not just Nineveh, but also and especially Nineveh. Yeah? So Nineveh at that time grew to be the biggest city on earth, and atop one of the two acropolis was the one called Kuyunjik. Palaces were constructed, and we'll today look a little bit at the palace without rival, the Southwest Palace, which Sennacherib created as his main domicile. Here you can see in pink the settlement mound of Kuyunjik, the original city of Nineveh. At one point, this was all there was to Nineveh. And then on the second image, you see the Southwest Palace, the excavated areas. A lot of it is merely reconstructed. And we are going to look at some detailed imagery later today. This building was owed a lot to the preceding palaces that had been built, but it was something, on a different scale. It was far larger, and you have to imagine that it sits on top of Kuyunjik, at a corner that is visible from the Tigris, so you would basically be able to see this basically from the Syrian border almost, I would say. It rises atop the city walls on top of this acropolis, which is much higher than the lower city, and there is this multi-storied building here in a vision of an artist called Balage Baloch. I think he did a pretty good job. And this thing was the most colorful thing anyone would see when coming near Nineveh. Yeah? The northern Mesopotamia is depending on the season, is either a place where everything is shades of green, and some shades of blue, or it's sort of beige, browns, grays, yeah? And then in the middle of this, we have this grandiose building with these enormous painted sculptures, huge gates, something that really, really impresses everyone who beholds it. And Sennacherib called it Palace Without Rival, so he knew what he was doing. And one of the things that is just really remarkable is that 3 kilometers of decorated walls were recovered from that palace. It's just amazing. 3 kilometers. We could, you know, go from here to King's College and back again, you know? That's sort of that distance. And all the way we could look at Sennacherib's reliefs, yeah? So quite spectacular. The best place to see some of this work is, of course, here in the British Museum. And I assume that most people here have seen the reliefs at one point or another. That's one of my biggest regrets about not being in London anymore, is that I can't just go from my office at UCL down to the British Museum and look up some detail of the reliefs. So this is really, really a very special place. I've been on Kuyunjik many times, also with Mark. It doesn't look like that now. It doesn't look like that at all. The best you can hope for is that you visit sometimes in spring when the whole mound is covered in daisies. That's really pretty. And if you're lucky, the guards are just in between slaughtering their chickens, so they're raising chickens, and they also have rabbits, and that it's really sort of like a bucolic, idyllic atmosphere up there. But it's one of those places where you really, really need to sort of know how it at one point looked like, because there is so little that shows you anything about this. Yeah. At the moment, the only thing that is really visible is just the location, I'd say, of Sennacherib's throne room. Yeah. Nothing more really, and the only thing that people appreciate really is the sheer size of that throne room. It's huge. You know, a lot of students, when they see this for the first time, they think this is the palace. It's that big, yeah. But in any case, so I think we need to appreciate what he did with this. In a way, this was probably how most people appreciated Assyrian kingship in their daily lives, just looking up and seeing. What it really is a project outline. This is what he intended to do. This, again, okay. There seems to be a problem with the microphone today. Yeah, okay. I'm very bad with handheld microphones, so, you know, start waving your arms if I start to do like this, which is very likely. Okay, so this is more a project outline, a declaration of intent, yeah, like we write when we apply for funding, than a true report of what had happened so far. So we'll then compare this a little bit later on when we look at what he actually did. So he says, on the one hand, well, he states his intention, I should say, to create a botanical garden that mirrors Mount Amanus in Syria and Chaldea in the south of Babylonia. So 2 landscapes full of rain, full of water, full of irrigation. He also declares his intention of basically creating allotments, I think for the first time in history. Allotments destined for the citizens of Nineveh, where they could plant their vegetable gardens. And he also explains how he was going to enable all of this, because you need a lot of water for this. And he proposed to cut a canal straight through mountain and valley that would bring water to Nineveh and would cause a constant supply of water to be available there. Yeah. So for this, the Assur River, the Assur River, that's the river that runs through Nineveh, was also going to be instrumental. So that was his declaration of intent in 702. And we can really check what happened to that project, because starting with Julian Reed's work on the matter, the canal system of Nineveh has been very, very well explored, especially since the advent of satellite imagery as one of our tools of research, and more recently through large-scale survey work undertaken especially by Daniele Morandi Bonacosi and his team. So you can see here the extent of that canal network, and unlike us many times when we overpromise in the grant application and underdeliver, he did the opposite. What he realized is so much more grandiose than what he originally had in mind, that one can only be impressed, really. So he made use of all possible sources of water in the region north of Nineveh. He utilized, on the one hand, the fact that snow melt water comes down in spring and can be collected in reservoirs, like here near Dohuk. He also utilized the fact that there are seasonal springs that can be tapped and exploited by connecting them to the larger waterworks, like here the Gomel River, near one of his most famous water installations. He used aqueducts that predate Roman structures by many hundred years to transport water over very, very long distances, like here the remains of his aqueduct at Jerwan. Note also the inscriptions that decorate this. And he had canals cut into the living rock as he had planned in his 702 inscription, like here at Faida. And we've already yesterday looked at this image, because we looked at the theology of empire after the conquest of Babylon. Some of you will remember that at that time, God Ashur was, developed into a new type of god, I would say, by having him absorb the characteristics and duty of Marduk of Babylon. And I remind you that this is why the god, the first in the line is Ashur, is standing on two animals, not just one. So we talked about this yesterday. What I want to point out here is that the reliefs are cut into the inner side of the canal, so when the water would flow through the canal, it would pass by the deities. And just like the guardian figures that stand at the sides of the gates in Nineveh and in the palace, in the same way, these gods stand guard over the water and bless it, purify it, and grant it. Yeah? So the whole thing vastly overperformed what was initially promised. And I just wanted to point out that when we read Assyrian inscriptions, as many of you know, of course, we always have to look at when they were composed, because while they present everything as already having happened, quite often when it comes to the building reports, they were composed at the very earliest stages of the creation of the buildings. And we can therefore not be completely sure whether they ran out of funds, someone died, you know, something changed, yeah? So with Nineveh, we have so many inscriptions pertaining to the creation of the city and its surroundings that John Russell, at one point, of course, wrote an entire book that used these sources as a way of tracking progress. In any case, it is a very successful building project, I should say. It's a building project that defined the topography of Nineveh until the end of the 7th century. And Sennacherib created, indeed, not just a palace without rival, but also an ecosystem, an agricultural system without rival at the time. Now is the time to turn to the paleoclimatic records that Mark has mentioned. You can see me here with a speleothem that was harvested, as one says, in 2015 from Shalai Cave in the Karadao Mountains. I'm 1.74 meters, and that thing is twice my size. It's a really, really great record. It's been worked on ever since, and the first papers are coming out now, yeah? 2 papers have been published recently. A third is soon being submitted. That's the one I'm referring here to, and that is the paper that deals with the Neo-Assyrian period. For now, I just want to say that the data from the Shalai speleothem, when it comes to the Assyrian period, broadly matches the result from previous studies on the Kunabar cave, and in detail deepens and furthers our understanding quite sufficiently. But on the whole, this stands, yeah? These results stands, and just to again explain this image. As you can see, I mean, it's obvious that the green is positive and red is negative. I think that much is clear. And in the period that we are interested in, the 7th century, we are deep in the red. Yeah? Unusually for our conventions, this is in the past and this is in the future. Okay, so that you understand. Yeah. So so we have when Nineveh was created, you can see the colleagues put that in their graph here. This is at the beginning of this really, really pronounced period of aridity. In the time, during the time that Sennacherib worked on Nineveh, during that time, the aridity got worse. Yeah, worse and worse and worse. And so when we see that the waterworks of Nineveh were realized in a much, much grander scale than originally planned, we can likely make a connection that this was directly influenced by the observance of drier and drier years and problems in the northern Mesopotamian agriculture that normally should work well without any form of irrigation. Okay, so that's that here. And when we now turn to the ideas for these waterworks, we must, of course, look towards the north and the kingdom of Urartu, where similar installations, especially when it comes to the aqueducts and the canals, had been created already 100 years earlier. The most famous of these installations is the so-called Canal of Semiramis, after the Assyrian queen, that is also quite important in Armenian myth and storytelling. Nowadays, we like to call it the Menua Canal, after the king of Urartu who had it created. It is preserved to a length of 60 kilometers. It brings water from the east of what is today Turkey, to Lake Van. Now you might ask, why bring water to a lake? I mean, a lake, that's water. Why bring water there? That's because Lake Van is a salt lake. So there's one type of fish that lives there and likes it there. Otherwise, it's not the best environment for anything. And it is definitely not water you can use in agriculture or for consumption, as a matter of fact. So that has to always emphasized, I think. Otherwise, Lake Van is, of course, a lake that you can use for transportation and so on, but it cannot be used as a source of drinking water or water suitable for farming. Okay, so the Urartian canals show a lot of similarities to the Sennacherib canals. And of course there are canals in Mesopotamia, there are even canals in Assyria, as is often emphasized, but really one would have to argue very, very hard against Urartian influence. The only reason why one might want to do this is because as long as into the reign of Sennacherib's father Sargon, Urartu and Assyria were either directly at war with each other or had a sort of cold war going on. And there were restrictions to trade between the two, and there was a real iron curtain, in a way, between the two of them. We'll look at that now. So here we have a map that shows the geographic position on the one hand of the two most important centers, that's Nineveh and Tushpa on the eastern coast of Lake Van. You can see that Urartu is a country of mountains with 3 large bodies of water, while it's easy to talk about the Assyrian triangle and sort of see the cities of Ashur, Nineveh, and Arbela as a unity, it's much more difficult to describe Urartu as a country of 3 lakes, because the boundaries and the peaks between the 3 lakes are enormous. I'm Austrian, so I really appreciate a high mountain. But you know, it's sort of an unusual state for sure. It's so much divides these cities that you can see here, these sites, for several months every year, depending on how hard the snowfall would be. There, you know, you couldn't travel for up to 8 months per year between the different centers. So what I want to emphasize is that the reason why Assyria and Urartu are basically at odds as soon as we can trace Urartu as a state in the historical record is because they both are in a position to control the long-distance trade along what is in Persian times then called the Great Highway. Yeah? So coming out of Anatolia, this Great Highway then traces the fringe, the Piedmont hills of the Taurus Mountains to the south, along the modern border between Syria and Turkey, crosses then the Tigris in the Nineveh region, and reaches the Zagros again in Charizor region that we discussed yesterday. So, and it is in these 2 areas where the mountain area is left and the Mesopotamian plain is reached that we have conflict over centuries. Yeah? Now, by the time of Sennacherib, that is seemingly no longer an issue. At least there is no longer any open war going on, quite in contrast to what happened during his father's reign. And if we look at the sources, which are very unevenly distributed and incredibly one-sided and also overwhelmingly Assyrian, and we don't have to really deal with them much, when we look at this in larger historical units, then we have the fact that from 707 BC onwards, till at least the reign of Ashurbanipal, there is some kind of entente between Urartu and Assyria. And we can map that onto this aridity graph that we already studied. And in the same way that we can make sense, in a way, or contextualize Assyrian history with these changes in the paleoclimate, in the same way we can also do this for Urartu and, justify certain things. We won't be doing this now because we are only interested in the 7th century. But I want to point out that this period of entente falls exactly in this period of growing aridity. Now, now we change topic. We are going to return to this later. Now we change topic and we turn to Ashurbanipal. I just want to, celebrate, I suppose, the British Museum exhibition from a few years back. I was actually shocked that it's that long ago. I think COVID has messed up all our sense of time. I thought it was 3-4 years ago, no, but it was in 2018. I think it was John Taylor, right, John, who came up with this. At least it's on a website to do with the exhibition, and the name that is given in the credits is you. So someone came up with this: warrior, scholar, empire builder, kingslayer, lion hunter, librarian. Not you, okay. Well, it's a great description. And does Ashurbanipal justice. I would have added sadist, perhaps, but that's maybe part of Kingslayer. We are going to focus on empire builder now. And we are in the century of experimentation, and Ashurbanipal had some unusual ideas about statecraft and diplomacy, and we'll explore these now. In any case, if you haven't seen the exhibition, I think the catalog is still available, and it's one of the most beautifully illustrated catalogs showcasing the Assyrian art in the British Museum, with lots of clever and interesting articles. I think it's still on sale, so go and get it. It's a great book. And I hope there will soon be an Assyrian exhibition again, because clearly it's been too long. Okay, so yesterday we talked about the new conceptions of Assyrian kingship and Assyrian royal succession that Esarhaddon developed, and how this wasn't really very successfully passed on into the next generation. Yeah, I ended this part of my lecture with this slide and said, well, after this brother war between Ashurbanipal and his brother, the king of Babylon, Shamash-shum-ukin, in a way, Assyria still was, a very large country, but at odds with all former allies and client states. That's the skulls. And there is one exception, and that is Urartu. And that is even more remarkable if we bear in mind that until the late 8th century, Assyria and Urartu had been at war all the time. Yeah. So we want to explore this curious friendship a bit more. And for that, we return into the palace without rival, and specifically into room 33, which is there, an entrance room from the southern terrace. So this artistic impression of how the palace looked like showed us the western terrace. That was from here. And the southern terrace was not quite as fancy, was a bit simpler, but still a grandiose facade in its own right. And the first room that you would enter as you came into the big gate was room 33. And Ashurbanipal used his grandfather's palace. Why wouldn't he? It was a great building, great location, a meaningful system, a meaningful building. And he refurbished certain rooms that were important for his use of the palace. Yeah? One of them is room 33. So he had his own wall decoration installed there. Yeah? And we're going to look at that now. Before we do that, I want to inform you how one traditionally treated messengers and envoys that came to the Assyrian king seeking an audience. So the custom was that they were treated very, very well. And to showcase this and to make this very, very clear to everyone they met in the palace or after, they were given purple garments, purple being the royal color, purple being a dye that was created by extracting tiny, tiny amounts of dye, purple dye, from lots and lots of small snails that you found only on the Phoenician coast, so a very, very expensive dye. So messengers get dressed in purple and get given silver jewelry, so different ones. So it can be bracelets, it can be anklets, can be belts, but it has to be silver. Gold is reserved for royalty. Yeah. Okay. So this is well attested, especially in the correspondence of Sargon, including in letters written by his crown prince, Sennacherib, the later king. And we do know that even Assurbanipal was aware of this custom because he too, on occasion, used that principle. So we can compare and contrast this behavior and this way of treating envoys with what happened when an Urartian delegation visited him, as immortalized on the wall reliefs of room 33. You can go to the BM and look at it. If you're lucky, it's on display. I think it's unfortunately mostly down in the Assyrian galleries and is sort of sent around the world. Where is it now, John? Do you know? I think last time it was somewhere in the Gulf, but okay. So unfortunately, you can't go to the British Museum, but you can look up the high-quality imagery on the British Museum website. We are going to look only at the top of the depiction. So it has two registers. The bottom register shows a battle scene in Tiltuba in Elam, and the top scene, which is of interest to us, is a reception scene of this Urartian diplomatic delegation at the city of Arbail, modern Erbil. Okay. Assurbanipal is incredibly important in art historical terms because it is during his reign that the narrative composition of Assyrian reliefs introduces big changes and becomes very complex. It's often compared to comic books. So that's why I start by explaining the scene that we are going to study in some detail. So there is a first panel over there marked with 1. Then the scene jumps to this part here that I marked as number 2. And that panel has an inscription with it, marked A. And then we turn to the middle part, which is the last in the sequence, with another inscription. That's what and we're going to look at it in this sequence, yeah? Okay, so the first panel doesn't have its own inscription, but we can use the royal annals that describe this same scene to give us the context we require. We learn from this that Rusa, the king of Urartu, had out of his own free will decided to send his envoys to Ashurbanipal, specifically to the city of Arbail. And he sent them with audience gifts that included some that we can see here. Further on, the relief is broken, so more of what is mentioned here may have been depicted, but what we can see for sure are the horses and the scepters that are being mentioned. Yeah? There should also be mules and horn-shaped drinking vessels, as well as purtu weapons, whatever they are. And that's as far as we are interested in the text now. Yeah? So, in red are the audience gifts as far as preserved, and in yellow are the 2 Urartian messengers. Eva Miller, from UCL and Oxford, in a very clever paper, has pointed out that this is an instance of where the depiction of individuals really verges into portraiture. Throughout the 3 scenes, these envoys are shown with the same very individualistic facial features. So she argues that these are actual portraits of the people to an extent depicted, in contrast to what we normally have in Assyrian reliefs where everyone looks pretty much the same. Yeah? So these 2 envoys are characterized as Urartians by their dress and especially these floppy hats that they are wearing. Yeah? Okay. And we can see here, this is a very normal introduction scene. Members of the Assyrian court are introducing the Urartian delegation, including the gift bearers that accompany the envoys, into the presence of the king. You've seen then that we jump across 2 reliefs, basically, to the second panel. That's here. And there is Ashurbanipal. He sits atop a chariot of the type that has been described as the Assyrian Porsche. It's hugely unnecessary to use something like that in war at that time, but Ashurbanipal likes to receive others standing atop of this gigantically large thing. Yeah? So the wheels must measure in diameter more than 2.5 meters. So huge thing. There is up there under the umbrella, again, this is something that marks his royalty. The king is the only person who can stand under such an umbrella. It's reserved for him and him only. And there is his honor guard standing in front of him. And then I've marked, again in yellow, the Urartian ambassadors, and in red, 2 other people. And in the inscription that goes with this panel, the beginning is pretty much what we've already read in the Annals passage. And in pink, then, it says, I, that's Ashurbanipal, made 2 people who are envoys of the land of Elam stand before them. That's the ambassadors of Urartu. Stand before them with writing boards inscribed with insolent messages. And this is taken to mean that these two Elamites, one of whom has a writing tablet in his hands, is made to read out the correspondence between Assurbanipal and the kingdom of Elam during the time of the war between him and Shamash-shum-ukin and his allies, because Elam was allied with his brother, the king of Babylon. I told you that we don't look in detail at the relief part at the bottom, and I said that this was a battle in Elam. Yeah? Okay. So, these two people, Nabudamik and Umbadara, are known also from other accounts and are very, very high-ranking members of the Elamite court. Okay, so that's the first thing Ashurbanipal has in store for these unsuspecting visitors from far away Urartu. Rather than getting to read out their own letters, yeah, which are, of course, more friendly in tone, they are made to listen to these other letters. One wonders what the language of correspondence was at that time, because we are at the court of Assyria, but there is correspondence from Elam in play and correspondence from Urartu. Yeah? Neither of these languages is related to each other. All of them can be recorded with variants of cuneiform, and we can either say, well, most likely it's Assyrian cuneiform, but we could also argue that it may have been Aramaic. The fact that this is written on a writing tablet, that's what he has in his hands up there, makes the decision very difficult. If it were a clay tablet, we could definitely say that it would be Assyrian. We don't really know too much about what was used by the time of Assurbanipal. In previous reigns, like Sargon, it would definitely have been Assyrian, and we have actually letters from various client states that use Assyrian cuneiform, or at least Babylonian cuneiform, to communicate with the king. Here we can't be so sure. It's in any case clear that whatever the language, whatever the style of writing, what the Elamites have recorded is understandable to the Urartians. There is no translator mentioned or visible, and so I would assume that it is a language that was acceptable to the king of Assyria, so basically it must be either Assyrian or Aramaic, but that's a detail. Okay, so the poor envoys have to listen to these insolent messages that had previously been received by the king of Assyria. This, of course, demonstrates that the Assyrian crown at that time archived the international correspondence, as had been the case also earlier. We have very, very little of Ashurbanipal's political correspondence, so that's quite important, really, to know. The two Urartian messengers look on sort of in a subservient posture. They've raised their hands, which expresses this sentiment, and hear what these Elamites have to say. This is in the context, of course, of victory celebrations of the victories against the Elamites. So, what take that as you will. And we now turn to the third panel, and that's even, well, it's not even, well, it's really far, far worse now. So we have our two ambassadors. Here you can really see that they are depicted quite distinctly also from each other, standing, being led by Assyrian courtiers to witness the torturing and killing of two men. In the inscription panel, the names are left blank. Can you see that up there? There's what we call the personal wedge that indicates a personal name, and then there's a gap, and then there's a second gap. From the from the royal annals that are recorded on clay prisms, we know that it's Manuki Ache and Nabu Utsali. Those are two dignitaries of the Gambulu tribe in Babylonia on the border to Elam, and Gambulu was another prominent supporter of the Shama-Shumukin rebellion. Okay, so the Urartians are made to witness how these people have their tongues torn out and how they are being flayed. And this is because they uttered blasphemies against Ashur. Yeah? So in a way, one wonders whether this was the next step, in a way, that awaited these Elamites that were just made to repeat their insolent messages. It's very unlikely that the Gambulians were sort of uttering blasphemies against Ashur. What they certainly had done was rejecting the rule of Assurbanipal, which largely coincides. So we have our Urartians being made to witness this spectacle, and it's sort of the most horrifying way you can kill someone slowly. I don't think it's what they expected when they came to Arbela. If you are sent on a diplomatic mission to the court of Assyria with the expectancy of being dressed in purple and giving some silver trinkets, and the first thing that happens is that you have to witness torture and murder, the subsequent negotiations will have a certain tone and maybe somberness to them. So I would say this is a huge new tone in Assyrian diplomacy and statecraft. You could not possibly find anything like this in Sargon's tone when he deals with foreign states, despite the fact that, of course, he too liked to have people flayed. Yeah. So there are depictions of this as well. But you know, to sort of stage this as part of a state visit is novel. Let's put it like this. And of course, we have to point out that that Ashurbanipal as a whole has a very theatrical flair for all his public interactions. On the whole, he is unusual as an Assyrian king for not really going on campaign. This is normally one of the main forms of interaction with the people, yeah, being on campaign, being on an extended camping trip for several months with people from all over the empire. He didn't do that. He largely stayed in Nineveh and encouraged the army by praying and performing rituals. When the results were achieved that he wanted, he staged these events, let's say, in the cities of the Assyrian heartland, Nineveh, but also Arbail, where people were basically given the gist of what had happened in a highly theatrical and you know, over the top way that was invariably incredibly brutal and ended in the person's death. And you know, that is really also completely new. There is no doubt that corporal punishment and murder and so on, political executions were performed before, but not in this stylized and theatrical way. I'll mention something about that tomorrow as well. Okay, so if we return to this friendship with Urartu, if this was part of it, then it's unlikely to be a very, I don't know, it's sort of a friendship marked by intense threatening behavior from one side, yeah? And there must be a reason why Urartu and Assyria were interacting with each other. I mean, this all sounds more like the beginning of a conflict, but that's not what it was, yeah? So, this is my hypothesis. I return to the issue of increasing aridity. And I want to point out that what is really, really bad for northern Assyria, or Assyria in total, is actually pretty good for eastern and central Anatolia. So the reason why I have got this weather map for the 5th of September 2022 was because I made the trip from Van down to the Mosul area at that time by Dolmusch. Really beautiful, landscape. One comes down. One really experiences the hotness and aridity of the Mesopotamian plain during this trip. It's sort of made slightly less pleasant than it might otherwise be by the fact that one crosses the border between Turkey and the Kurdish region of Iraq. Erbil region is controlling this there. And there are Turkish military camps down to really far into Assyria. Into Iraq, yeah? That's quite, that's not much talked about, but basically the Erbil province is full of Turkish military camps. So I remember traveling in Turkey in the 1990s in the east, when every 30 kilometers or so there was a Turkish camp and one had to be identified all the time. So that feeling you can experience there again in a region that is nominally not part of Turkey. It's quite strange, yeah? Okay, so there's a huge difference in temperatures between these high-lying mountain regions and the Mesopotamian plain. Wheat in Anatolia is, as most of you will know very well, very important. Wheat was first domesticated in the Karachadar region, that's sort of west of Tushkhan that we mentioned yesterday. All cultivated wheat anywhere in the world today derives from these wild wheat that was first domesticated there some 10,000 years BC. The type of wheat that is traditionally grown in Anatolia is winter wheat. Winter wheat, as the name implies, grows over the winter. Yeah? So you plant it in autumn. It doesn't mind the cold temperatures and the snow during the winter month when it grows in the soil. It emerges in spring, and then it's harvested in late spring, in May, just as the weather turns dry and hot. Whatever happens in winter is of no consequence to the wheat as soon as it's in the soil. The dangerous season for winter wheat in Anatolia is spring, because the entire crop can be destroyed if there is too much rainfall. And so you can see where I'm going with this growing aridity that, of course, also affected Turkey would have been very beneficial for the local agriculture. And whereas harvests would have been failing in the Mesopotamian plain because there was too little water, harvests would not fail in Anatolia because the spring rain, the dangerous spring rain, was not as much a problem as it would have been otherwise, okay? So I want to emphasize that Turkey, of course, is a huge exporter of cereals, both wheat and other goods, but especially wheat, and also milled and produced wheat produce, such as pasta and so on. And what I find, I couldn't find anything for 2024, at least not easily, but in 2023, 3.675 million tons of wheat flour were exported, and primarily to Iraq and Syria. That shouldn't surprise us, of course. Then Somalia and Djibouti. These states couldn't function with these imports from Turkey. I remind me that in Ottoman times, of course, the association between the Horn of Africa and the Ottoman Empire was very, very close. So that's part of the current resurfacing of Turkish, let's call it imperialism or nostalgia, however you want to. And interestingly, Venezuela. Yeah, you all know which country would be the sort of easier grain exporter for Venezuela. But of course, that country is more or less at war with Venezuela. Yeah? So Turkey has stepped into the gap left by the US here, and Turkish wheat is transported around half the globe because there is a problem elsewhere. So I just want to sort of emphasize that also today, exporting and importing food, especially in times of food insecurity, and we are again in such a period, is highly political and politicized. And surely there is no difference in the 7th century BC. So I want to draw attention to the fact that while Urartu is not engaging in any kind of conquest or expansion of power, this is a very, very productive period for the construction of what is normally called fortresses, curiously in the center of the realm. So of course one can say this is a period of population movement, the Scythians, the Cimmerians, at some point the Medes are everywhere, and one can argue that these have a defensive function. Here is an image of Karmir Blur and the Pitoi with grain that were excavated there by the Russian mission. Karmir Blur is now located in Armenia. Two other fortresses were built by Rusa, son of Argishti, who is to be identified with the Rusa who sent the diplomatic mission. Two of them are on the shores of Lake Van, Ayanis and Kefkale, one excavated by the British School of Archaeology in Ankara. Ayanis is a Turkish mission, and Bastam lies in Iran, and that was a mission of the German Archaeological Institute. Okay, so two of these lie on Lake Van. The others lie in regions that are of less interest to us in our present context. Here is the map of Karmir Blur. If defense was your main interest, you would surely follow the previous ground plan of Urartian fortresses, which are constructed really as fortresses, occupying very narrow stretches on mountains in excellent position, defensive position. None of these four fortresses have these qualities. Instead, they are huge, huge, huge granaries. And Karmir Blur alone allows for the storage of 2.3 million liters of grain, in addition to wine and what have you. Yeah. So I would say what we have here is Urartu in this time of growing aridity, which, as I hopefully explained to you, is a very good thing for that part of the world. We have Urartu focusing not so much on conflict or defense, but on large-scale wheat storing solutions, I would say. And two of those are situated in such a way that they are quite easily accessible to Assyria. Now I turn I'm almost done. I'm turning very briefly to Ashurbanipal's coronation hymn, a text that was propagated when Ashurbanipal came to the throne in 668. Whether it was really used for his coronation is another thing, doesn't really matter to us. But there is a great focus on food supply solutions, cheap and reliable food supply solutions. So I've marked the two passages that I find most important here. May the people of Assur buy 30 kor of grain for 1 shekel of silver. Those are impossible prices. This is way too cheap, but never mind, one can hope. May the people of Assur buy 3 seach of oil for 1 shekel of silver. May the people of Assur buy 30 minas of wool for 1 shekel of silver. And then later on, in his years of reign, may there constantly be rain from the heavens and flood from the underground source. Yeah. And so this is part of the government program that Ashurbanipal has proclaimed at the beginning of his reign. Yeah? And I think this friendship with Urartu is how he comes through on this. So he forms this link with the country just north of the border. At that time, the various buffer states that once protected Urartu from Assyria and Assyria from Urartu, they don't exist anymore. Shubria, Ukku, Kumme, no longer there. The border is direct between the two of them. And there are two good options to bring grain and other foodstuff down from Lake Van to central Assyria. One is on the western side of Lake Van. The Botansu has its spring fairly close to Lake Van, merges then into the Tigris near Siat, and then you're on the Tigris and you just go down to Nineveh and further beyond. The other one is the Apasab. With it's a bit more complicated, but you can certainly consider it as well. It would have the advantage of reaching the Arbela region. The first one, Botansu and Tigris, I'm convinced that they used because there is really not much you would have to do. So it's a manageable distance, and we will talk about the specific mode of transport for this tomorrow, but it is technically no issue at all. I remind you that wheat is harvested in May. That's when the shipping conditions on these rivers are good. Yeah, you couldn't do this later. You couldn't do this in winter, of course, and in the spring would be also quite problematic. But from May onwards, this is easy. When we are in Assur in February and March, we note how then, when the flood comes in, when the snow melts and the rain falls in Turkey, and nowadays it's sort of over basically in later March. The flood goes down then. So, so this works quite well with the wheat calendar, and I propose, therefore, that this curious friendship is really a trade partnership that Ashurbanipal, so the mode of transport we'll discuss tomorrow. This is a trade partnership. And we see Ashurbanipal create this, well, maybe not created anew, but certainly negotiate details of this trade partnership at a time when it must have been abundantly clear in Assyria that this aridity was not going away. And by that time, it should have also been very clear that Sennacherib's canal network, while extraordinary in its scope and certainly a great resource for Nineveh, was not going to be the solution of all of this. It's absolutely impossible, yeah, that this would be enough to feed the heartland, especially at a time where there were thousands and thousands of Egyptians and so on being resettled here. Yeah? So somehow we need to be able to explain that throughout the 7th century, when we know for a fact that the agriculture would have been massively, massively impacted, there was no scarcity of food in the mainland. And we will tomorrow see that people in Assur, at least, were blissfully oblivious till the very end that they were living in tough times and were overwhelmingly concerned with, how to get nice wine, yeah, but not how to get food, So I think that's very important. And while I think Ashurbanipal is a horrid creature, I think his new approach to Assyrian food security by outsourcing production to the long-standing arch-enemy Urartu was the reason why the empire didn't collapse already in the 660s. As I said yesterday, a very, very realistic scenario. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes, thank you. I think...
This is my birthday present to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I guess this is our couch moment now. So.
Yes, I don't know which one to use. I have a super...
We'll hand out the mics in a second. I thought we would start...
This doesn't work.
Questions.
Does yours work?
Yes, I think it does. I'll start off questions, I guess, and then we'll be happy to spread it.
You can first tell me whether you believe me when it comes to Urartu.
I think it's very interesting what you just proposed, actually, because it's a bit counter to some of the earlier publications that you mentioned yesterday, the Sinna paper, for instance, about the collapse of Assyria. And so you're really presenting a very resilient model of Assyria.
But of course we know from our Speleothem that there was, that the whole thing isn't as
smooth.
Yeah.
So I mean, I wanted to ask you more about the end, this sort of towards the end of the 7th century.
Yeah.
Maybe tomorrow you'll say more about this,
Yeah.
but sort of why that whole system really crumbles. And it sounds like it may be more internal than anything else.
Well, because Ashurbanipal is an idiot and never proclaims a crown prince. So I'll talk about this tomorrow, but I mean, we have this very unusual fact that this guy is on the throne from 668 to 631. He has been appointed crown prince. Okay, he clearly doesn't like the solutions that Esarhaddon came up with, but it's curious that he dies, and then there is no one around but 2 children to be the next kings of Assyria, when we know that during the reign of Esarhaddon, his father, Ashurbanipal, already fathered his first children. So what did he do? I mean, he is a sadist, a librarian, and all sorts of things, but he also was really unpleasant, and one wonders, being the son of a father who had repeatedly killed off half of the magnates at least, one wonders what happened to all these sons of Ashurbanipal. Yeah? It's a bit strange that you have these little orphan boys, who need guidance after 631. I mean, there should be, people that were in their 40s and so on available to steer the empire, but they weren't. Yeah.
Great. Well, we'd like to open up to our audience, I guess, for questions in the back. We'll get a mic to you in a second if you want.
the beginning. You mentioned at the beginning about the effort and the mechanics of bringing all that water into Nineveh, just for a garden.
No.
But you said
don't forget the allotments.
Okay, for a garden, for allotments and a garden. Why?
Well, I don't know when you joined my lecture, but I think I couldn't have possibly been clearer about the fact that we are dealing with a period of increasing aridity. The aridity, I hope I'm not misremembering this, but I remember Dominic at one point saying that the aridity increases threefold of what it is increasing at present at the time. Can you imagine that? Yeah. So, and this is not man-made for sure, you know. So obviously we are not arguing against climate change, you know. We just point out that in the 7th century, I've contextualized this a bit yesterday, in the 7th century, for reasons that we don't quite understand,
These oscillations.
the aridity is dramatic. The increase of aridity is dramatic. So let's say Sennacherib realizes this by the time he makes Nineveh his capital in 702, and at that time he has this idea with, you know, the Khosrow. Let's lead a bit more water to it, and then let's have these allotments, and I can have my garden, and how nice is that? And then 13 years later, he has realized something that is vastly more complex in scope, and takes water from the entire mountain region north of Nineveh. So why is this necessary? Because in this decade, the aridity becomes more extreme. Yeah, and they had already started with this technology, and then they just kept going and never stopped, basically, as long as that man was alive.
Okay, I get that, but I get the allotments, I get the cultivation, but why a garden?
Why a garden? Because that's what all his predecessors had done as well. An Assyrian palace without a garden is not a palace. Like a palace nowadays in Iraq is not a palace without a garden. This is a very dry environment, and it's a hallmark of civilization to tame the environment and turn even the driest place into something that will nourish at least a tree. The poorest farmer will try to have a tree next to his window for the smell. People walk around, right, with picking flowers, and will hold them in their hand for hours and smell them all the time, you know, without thinking about it. I don't know a society where trees are as appreciated as in Iraq. When Iraqi colleagues come to Munich, the thing that they all point out is the big tree that grows in the garden of the history department. They all take a picture with this tree, which is a couple of 100 years old. Yeah, and I think in Assyrian times we can see the same thing. Sennacherib is not the first one to come up with a garden, but it is inconceivable to him to create a palace without rival, yeah, so the best palace ever, without having a garden, because every palace must have a garden.
What's the significance of a garden? Is it paradise?
Well, yeah, I guess so. As someone who likes gardening, I would say so. But obviously, it's not. I think it's the idea of cultivation. You know, when the Assyrian king, as some of you will know, there are these times when the Assyrian king undergoes a ritual where he is not the king, but someone else stands in for the king, and then the king is called the farmer. Yeah. So in the end, we are dealing with a highly agrarian culture. Everyone is aware of this, and if you have a bit of time, you don't just produce food that you will eat and consume, and you and your animals, but you will make nature beautiful around you. And I think that's the thing I probably like most about the Assyrian kings, that they liked gardening. Everything else is pretty unrelatable, I'd say, but that I think one can appreciate. Yeah. And that's why our excavation house is so popular in Shargat, because Mark and I had the great privilege to work in Assur already in 2001, when I had a different hair color and you had more hair. And then the State Board of Antiquities had regularly worked in Assur. The headquarters of Shargat Antiquities Services were in the Andre excavation house, and the garden was beautiful.
Yeah, that's right.
It was really, really beautiful. You came in, it was so hot. We worked there in August and September. We were there for 9/11, you know. Yeah. And it was just so wonderful to come into the house. The house itself was unpleasantly hot, but the garden had been managed in such a way that there were these overgrown paths and everything, you know, the scent, and, you know, it's just beautiful. The flowers, I unlike Mark, don't actually want to invite you all to come to the excavation house, so I generally don't advertise the garden too much, but because we have a lot of local visitors who just sort of come and sit on the bench in the garden, because it's really beautiful. So the first thing we did after we'd restored the building was plant the garden. I bought 42 trees, which is, you know, here I would be ruined, but in Iraq, trees are really cheap. It's really, really cheap, you know, and good quality also. So mainly citrus trees, which I love, and pomegranate, and there's the one surviving palm tree, of course, apple trees as well. And now, 3 years after they were planted, they look like trees look here after a decade. And they are being irrigated with Tigris water that is being led up by a pump, which is powered by our solar panels. And this is, I think, people are, I'm sure, very critical of how we excavate, because we're too slow and we don't want to find anything. But the one thing that they really appreciate is the garden. Really. And we brought up furniture, which all of you who've lived in Baghdad will remember fondly, these palm front sofas that are very lightweight. And I for whatever reason, visited this workshop near that one big mosque where they still make them. And I arranged then to have them shipped up to Shargat, which happened. This is also super popular. And because you can carry these benches around and always put them in the shade and so on, or near the tree that is just in flower. So really, honestly, I have to say, to me, Iraq, the most positive thing I can say about this part of the world where ISIS started and where women have to leave school when they hit puberty, at the latest when they are 12. So a lot of things that I really, really don't like. But the common denominator is a love for plants, a love for flowers, and a love for gardening. Yeah, and so that too is Moslawi.
Definitely is. We love gardens.
But it's cheap. That's why Mark approves of it, because buying 42 trees is still affordable.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, let's ask some
I
more
hope
questions.
that answers it.
I guess here we go up in the front.
Oh yeah. Did you not ask a question yesterday?
No,
That's why you shouldn't be given a question, but the lady in the back who hasn't yet asked a question. Don't you think, in the interest of fairness?
Let's ask.
Because I know that Hanya will cut us off soon, but, you know, whatever. Here's the chair.
Why don't you go ahead? I
Yeah.
already said.
Yeah, here's the chair. I just know that, please.
Please go ahead.
Okay, sure. If
As you
don't
like.
want to pass it to the other.
No, it's fine. I just, you know, you already asked the question, I think, so.
Go ahead.
Yeah. You do what you need.
Okay, just like maybe very quickly. If you go back to like the relief of Ashur from earlier, when we had the relief with the like the envoys being made to read out the incident messages, and like the sort of uncertainty of like exactly what language they're writing this in. Like, do we actually have a way of getting an idea of like who like these messages would have been written by exactly? So like, are these from the king, or are these being like something that the envoys have already said that they're being asked to read out, or like something like that? Is it possible to tell?
If I understood the question, you ask me how I know who these messengers are?
Or like how we would know like what sorts of messages they were writing?
Well, because of the inscription panel. Remember, there are these 3 panels in the relief, and 2 of them have inscriptions, and in the inscription it identifies the key participants. And in addition to that, we can often combine the pictorial evidence with the text of the royal annals of Assurbanipal, and that's why we have a bit additional information, such as the identities of the 2 Elamite dignitaries that were tortured to death, and the description of the audience gift that is being delivered. There was this lady. Yeah.
Thank you. I was interested when you were talking about the Cold War between Urartu and Assyria, and whether it was always Assyria being the aggressor and Urartu, because it seemed interesting that when Assyria was in trouble, that Urartu didn't take advantage of that.
Yeah. 100% agreed with that. No, this was very balanced. Assyria was by no means always the aggressor. What remained the same was these 2 regions that were at the heart of the conflict. Where the Euphrates comes out of the Taurus in what is today the border between Syria and Turkey on the one hand in the west, and the main passage through the Zagros Mountains on what is today the border between Iran and Iraq. Yeah, that's where the conflicts took form, I would say. And over these 200 plus years where we have this war going on, we have hot periods and we have cold periods, and it changes who is the aggressor and who is on the receiving end. Yeah, but when the war is not hot, there is no diplomatic. They never exchange messengers, never. Yeah. There is cultural exchange for sure, but that's usually because people are being captured as captives of war and are then used as a conduit of knowledge and so on. So there is a lot of cultural interaction, of course, but there is nothing like this diplomatic exchange that I've described. And, why did Urartu not take advantage? I gave a bit of historical context when I said, okay, these fortresses, four fortresses, remember, they are often interpreted as, fortresses in the traditional sense. And the fact that they are not at the borders of Urartu, but very close to the center, is explained by the fact that from the late 8th century onwards, the Caucasus Mountains were not the formidable border that they tend to be today, but instead formed a bridge for nomadic people coming out of the, let's call it, Eurasian steppe region, over the Caucasus into Iran, Anatolia, and periodically also Mesopotamia. And those are the Cimmerians and the Scythians. Yeah? And from for the late 8th century, we know that there is one huge defeat that the Urartian army suffers at the hands of the Cimmerians. Yeah? What that means for the 7th century is less certain. Yeah? By the 7th century, we have the Cimmerians and then later also the Scythians as far east as Lydia in Anatolia, yeah? So like north of Ephesus and so on, and in Iran. Yeah? So the Manians that I mentioned yesterday were at times allied with these steppe people. Yeah? And you are absolutely right. Why? We have to ask, why is Urartu not taking advantage of Assyria? Well, as I said, I would say they shifted their previous interest in military conquest and conflict, which sort of, brings in cash, to selling grain, which is way easier and probably brought them a lot more money. The Rusa who built these 4 fortresses was succeeded by another king also called Rusa, who also built fortresses in that region. Yeah, so there was just one, well-documented stage. That's how I would see this. I mean, if you can, depends on how you see it, but I think I think imperialism is, in the end, a way of getting resources. Yeah. And if you can get the resources you want in another way, why sacrifice the lives of your subjects? That's not a popular thing to do overall, yeah? So, and it seems to have worked for both ways. And Ashurbanipal has, unusual negotiation tactics. But again, I mean, there are politicians nowadays who have remarkably similar ways of doing this. And, the Trump tariffs and so on, I mean, is a more modern way of threatening and being like this, like what Ashurbanipal is doing. Yeah, it's a way of statecraft, sort of alienating when it's first introduced. The world at large at the time didn't have much time to get used to it, thank God, I have to say. But at the time, I think it must have worked, and otherwise, to me at least, it's not. I mean, I think Urartu probably really wasn't in a position to invade Assyria, even though it's really, really close and super easy, Takes, on a dolmush, if you're not stuck at the border for too long, you can do it in the morning. So, you can just come down the mountain, yeah? Okay, you have to train your people that they can withstand the higher temperatures, but then it's easy, I would say. But they didn't, yeah? So, I certainly don't want to be too deterministic when it comes to climate, but we now have that information, and I think that's something that we didn't have a few years ago, and that's consequently when we now try to explain Assyrian history, that's how we need to do it. It's a really serious source. It's not something that we can say, oh yeah, and there's this, yeah? I hope that at one point the solar flares and the magnetic change, becomes as clearly understandable to us as this, yeah? But, so in any case, I find it rewarding to think about what's going on in this way, yeah? And, Ashurbanipal was really on the worst possible terms with everyone apart from Urartu, Why? That's my answer, but you're welcome to come up with another alternative, and I hope that, my answer makes sense to some of you, but, of course, as my husband will remind me later on, this is all pure speculation. But that's what historians do, that's the beauty of being a historian, especially when we deal with ancient history. We have a very incomplete set of puzzle, and in the end, it's our imagination that fills these gaps or doesn't. And I have a very lively imagination, as should be clear. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Karen, so much for that. And of course, you should remind us that much of that data is thanks to you, of course.
No, that's much. It's thanks to us,
yes,
if anything.
In any case, I think that's all the time we have, unfortunately. So thank you all for attending. And just to remind you, one more night of this. So if you couldn't get your question in today, I hope you can get it in tomorrow.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.